Okay.
That's us.
Okay. Welcome the members to the 50th meeting of the Committee for Finance. I hadn't realised it's our half century of meetings since the man, it feels like a lot more than that for some people might say, but in any case, yes, yeah, absolutely. We're definitely in middle age now. Members, this meeting will be recorded and online and throughout Parliament buildings, and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. If you're in the public gallery, you are welcome to use your mobile devices as long as they're muted or in airplane mode. Agenda item 1 is apologies. We have no apologies, but we may have people joining us on Zoom.
We have apologies, from Paul Frew, and Philip Brett is not likely to be able to make the meeting. He's in Fermanagh with the Economy Committee.
No problem, that's fine. Yeah, we have apologies, that's my fault. I should have remembered that from our previous discussion. Okay, agenda item 2, declaration of interests.
Yes, sir. I noticed in the tabled packs there's a in-confidence letter reference a particular place and a particular council area. I'm not going to go any further details, but their constituents of mine, it's an issue I'm involved in.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. We can reflect that in the minutes. Yeah. Okay, and anybody else wishes to declare an interest as we go, that's fine. Agenda item 3, chairperson's business. So we are going to, the thing we're going to talk about first is something which was sent us in confidence, but it's been all over the paper and in the public domain, so we're not going to discuss it. We were asked to discuss it in...
Chairs, as long as members don't get into specifics, if they do know specifics, so...
Don't identify the people who know their names, don't say their names out loud.
Could I also ask through the chair, you don't identify the council areas?
No, if we can avoid doing that, Chair, as well.
So this is in the table pack first. This is it's page 3 of the table packs. The registrar, general registrar, has written to us regarding an issue which has arisen in relation to the conversion of civil marriages to partnerships. So, members, we're not going to, as I say, discuss it. It's marked with restrictions, but there are no restrictions. But it obviously is still a personal issue. So the statement, I think there's a statement being circulated or has been circulated to members.
I'm going to do that now through the Teams chat.
Okay.
Excitingly.
Members could just keep an eye on your Teams chat on your devices. So effectively, what happened is the two errors were made in the case of 2 civil partnerships. So 2 couples.
The wrong one. What am I doing?
So these were 2 couples who were incorrectly permitted to convert their civil partnerships into marriage, despite there being no legal provision for this. So this was effectively an irregular movement into marriages. The General Register Office are reaching out to the couples to apologise and offer their support. It is engaging with senior council areas. I think, first of all, I think this is a little bit concerning. That this is, so you should have it now, anybody who's able to check your device. I think it's concerning. First of all, this happened. I think we will want to understand in detail from the registrar and the GRO how this happened, and go from there. And obviously, it's concerning for the people involved who may have, for whom we hope there will not be any specific legal consequences or anything that it creates any consequences for them in their kind of financial affairs or anything like that, legal affairs. And I think
our understanding is that the two are broadly the same, and there shouldn't be ramifications, but it's just a case of making sure there's kind of no detail that we haven't kind of looked at.
So we will be asking the GRO to keep us updated on the investigation, establishing how this happened. And obviously, as part of that, ensuring it doesn't happen again, and also the specific outworkings for the couples affected. Does anybody wish to comment on it, Deputy Chair?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The most concerning thing for me was, in reading the details, was that there were 2 checks built in and they both missed it, one at the Registrar's office and one at the Council. So just in terms of the wider process, be keen to know what learning there is from that. It's just, that's why you have a secondary check, and both checks missed it, so it's just quite concerning, especially given just significance and personal nature of this type of thing.
Yeah, I think it is concerning, given that it's a very personal thing and affects people in a very profound way. Okay, so I think we will basically ensure that we get updated by the registrar. Indeed, we will be obviously engaging with them anyway on the scrutiny of the bill, so we can ask to be kept updated in their investigations, and if anything arises from that we need to scrutinise further, we can. Okay, so this is the next matter arising, which is the divorce law consultation. We've received correspondence at page 6 of the pack. That we've received correspondence from the Minister correspondence on the forthcoming consultation on the current law on divorce and the dissolution of civil partnerships. The consultation runs from the 23rd of June to the 26th of September 2025. A copy of the consultation document has been provided to the committee, and officials have offered to attend a committee meeting to address any initial questions relating to these proposals. The Minister indicates that the committee will be invited to scrutinise firm policy proposals as part of the legislative process, potentially by the end of this year. So, members, we need to consider when we schedule a briefing, and I think it would be helpful to do that if possible before the summer, but it depends on our forward programme.
If we do it once the consultation analysis has happened, members may recall.
So that will be after the summer. That will be in the
summer,
Chair,
yeah. Members may recall we did get an outline briefing on a potential divorce bill, civil or reform officials. Rob, what we might do is just see if they can do a quick update on any kind of changes around the substance of that. We also have the copy of the consultation. Dr. Aiken.
Steve Aiken.
Sorry, Chair. Could we, in the meantime, just to explain it, could we get Ray's to do the thing on no-fault divorce in England and Wales, just so we have a research paper to look at it, just so that we could clarify what the differences are? Because I mean, if that's going to be one of the options, I think we probably need a ready reckoner to understand what the differences are.
Members are
that's fine. Yeah,
seek that.
Continue with that. So, the next agenda item relates to Fermanagh and Omagh District Council and the central government policy and finance.
You're not allowed to speak, Gemma.
Do you
banned
want
from speaking.
Declare an interest.
Do you want to declare an interest?
Declare an interest in Fermanagh.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you are. Yeah, absolutely. The Central Government Policy and Financial Support, that's at page 50 of the meeting pack. The Rural Affairs Subcommittee for Fermanagh and Omagh District Council has progressed research and data analysis relating to that district with a particular focus on policy interventions and the associated resource modelling. The committee and a variety of other committees have been invited to consider the findings of the research relevant to its remit. So, members, this is really for us to suggest that we. They've asked us really to consider the information, but not. I'm not sure what particular policy intervention. I mean, I'm kind of happy for us to consider it or to have it. It's
for a little bit more detail if members are content.
Detail from Fermanagh and Omagh District Council.
About specifics. So
yeah.
It's a case of, because they've written chair to multiple committees, they haven't been specific about the details. So if we can go back, if members are content to go back, and we can say for the finance remit, and we lay out our remit for them, the committee's remit, and they can give us indications of what it is they've done specific to finance. If members are content with that, Chair, we can proceed that.
Yeah, I mean, I think they haven't actually sent us any. No. They've just sent us a letter saying they're doing this research, and it may well be very interesting. So I think we should just say keep us abreast, and let us know when there's. It might well be very interesting. But 3.3 is the Fiscal Council, an invitation to the launch of its report, which is next Tuesday, on the sustainability of funding for NI water. So, members, this is to note, any member can attend RSVP. You may have received your own invitation, but should you wish to...
Just to come in on that, we actually have shared that with the Infrastructure Committee, who it appears didn't get an invite. We had assumed it had gone to all committees. It appears it hasn't. So it's already been shared with Infrastructure because they met this morning. We did that preemptively. I don't think the Fiscal Council will mind. If members are content, we will push that out to all committees just in case.
Yes, I'm happy to do that, yeah.
Because I think that way you're more likely to get it to all members. They'll go out in packs then.
For all members of the Assembly?
All members will then get it, yeah.
All members of the Assembly? Yeah, I think that's fine.
We got a budget bill next Tuesday, have we?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not in the building either, but it's just
Monday?
so that there's an awareness.
Budget bills
also, the publication's happening online, so it's really as well making members aware that there's going to be something that they can access straight away too. It's
really people have the time in their diary and are able to attend. That's all. That's all.
I just think we've got a fairly busy week in the Assembly. Monday and Tuesday.
That's fine. Okay, the next agenda item is 3.5 was the Youth Assembly newsletter, and they've issued us with that. That's just a note. Now, 3.6 is the informal meeting with matters arising. The informal meeting with Hospitality Ulster that we've just had, just before the start of the formal meeting, we had an informal session with Hospitality Ulster who had requested contact with us off the back of the increase in employer national insurance, minimum wage and other cost pressures, including rates. They have asked that we use the committee to raise a couple of specific points, which I think we have broadly agreed to informally, but we need to formally agree to them. Number one is one of their consistent asks is off the back of motions that have been passed in plenary in the Assembly to ask what status the question of VAT, lower VAT for hospitality in Northern Ireland has, in respect of obviously the differential in the island, the north-south, the fact that hospitality VAT is lower in the south than it is in the north, which they believe is a significant detriment to the hospitality industry here, particularly in border counties. So they've asked that we raise this issue. I think it's reasonable for us to ask whether that will be part of the conversations the Finance Minister has with the Treasury, possibly not before the spending review, but afterwards, if he's looking at other either further fiscal evolution or other changes. So if we can ask the status of that, and likewise whether any thought has been given, and this isn't a UK policy but is a devolved from one, whether the question of the differential treatment of hospitality businesses in relation to rates versus those in GB or those in England and Wales anyway has been raised, whether any consideration has been given to further rates cuts or rates holiday for or rates relief for rural pubs was the question. So those are, if members are content, we'll raise those with the department. Jerry Carroll.
Sure, I missed the meeting, just another meeting that ran over, but I have no issue with getting that information, but it may be worth as well. I met Unite Hospitality recently, and they're doing a lot of work around sort of violence towards people in the workplace and safety getting home and other issues, so it may be worth just having them maybe give an informal briefing as well, because you obviously don't want one view of the sector, you want everybody, so I think that would maybe be useful as well.
I agree with that, and that's really important. As someone who spent a decade working in pubs and being abused by members of the public, and also having a great time and being very nice members of the public, it is more one for the economy committee. I just think it's a kind of employment rights question. So
yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, no issue with hospitality also, but I just don't know why you have one group and not another. So
well, I suppose what I would say is that we endeavour to. They've raised legitimate policy questions which are specifically for the committee. There's other that is a very important issue, the treatment of hospitality staff, but it's probably more one for the economy committee. So what I would suggest is we write to the economy committee and we ask whether they have, because I think it's a fair question, but I don't think it's necessarily one for this committee. So if people are content, can I suggest we write to the economy committee and ask whether they're considering the Unite proposals or the Unite report that's come out. And as I say, just on the question about hospitality, those are, I think, legitimate policy questions. We're not just a post box. We don't just do that for. We obviously have our own filtration process where we can decide what's pertinent, and I think those things are pertinent, but I think we can write to the economy committee on that specific point around Unite or the broader question of hospitality and ask whether they've been aware of it. Okay, since been raised. The next matter arising is our chairperson's business, I should say, is the Interparliamentary Forum on Intergovernmental Relations. So myself and chair of the Executive Office Committee will be at the Interparliamentary Forum in Westminster next
It is House
Thursday.
of Commons hosting chair this time round.
Okay, so if members agree that I, myself and the clerk will attend and feedback to members on the outcome of that, we'll share it in due course.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next agenda item are draft minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of May 2025. So members, of page 53 of the meeting pack are the minutes of the meeting we held on the 20th of May. Members are content. I'll sign those minutes.
Yeah, happy.
Okay, now agenda item 5 is matters arising.
Chair, I'm just conscious that it's 2:39.
Okay, so have we got the
anticipating the
ESR waiting for?
ESR.
We can do the ESR now and then come back to the matters arising. Should we do that?
Before the other briefing.
Sorry, Heather's there with a
Heather
poised.
was poised. Sorry, Heather.
I don't think the examiner's there.
She should be, I think, yeah.
She is.
Yep.
We also have hard copy to hand out for her because she had sent her own advice.
Okay.
So that will be going into closed session.
Okay. So members, we are just going to go into closed session because we're going to be getting detailed advice on legislation from the Examiner of Statutory Rules.
So
I can
I'm
count.
just going to give ourselves a couple of seconds. We'll just wait until we have a picture. It takes a wee minute or two to go live on the camera. There we go. We're live on camera now.
We're back. Okay. So members, we're now back in open session, and I'm pleased to say, as part of our evidence into the death, stillbirth and baby loss bill, we have an oral briefing from the Forget Me Not group, which is a group which supports parents who've experienced baby loss, and we are very pleased and privileged to have members of the group here with us today. For the benefit of members, there is a briefing pack at page 30 of your meeting pack with the clerk's memo talking about the purpose of today's session, where we are with bill scrutiny and some background information on Forget Me Not. And we're really privileged to have the group here with us today. This is a really important piece of legislation which we're trying to scrutinise, but also give people who have lived experience of this awful thing, that trauma, to give people the opportunity to have their say, give their experience, and help us shape the legislation in a way that is most appropriate and most impactful for people who have experienced this tragedy in their lives. Thank you all for coming. But we have Grace Coutts, who's chairperson of Forget Me Not. Hi Grace. Kelly Barnes, who's the treasurer, Suzi Gourley, who's treasurer, and Claire Gray, who is also a member. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. We really appreciate you giving us your time and also sharing your experience. I don't know if Grace or Kelly wants to give us go ahead, Kelly, an opening statement, and obviously members do indicate if you wish to ask a question.
Okay. So firstly, I'd just like to thank you for inviting us along today to have an input around the discussion of the death, stillbirth and baby loss bill, particularly the aspects of the bill that deal with the baby loss certificate scheme. So as introductions, this is Grace Coutts, mummy of Rosa Joy Coutts. Rosa passed away on the 9th of July 2019 and was born sleeping on the 12th of July 2019, and Grace is the chairperson of the Forget Me Not group. Claire Gray is mum to Matilda and Leonora. Matilda was born on the 28th of July 2013 and passed away on the 25th of October 2013. Leonora passed away on the 17th of November and was born on the 22nd of November 2017. And Suzi is mummy to Eli Henry Avery Gourley, and she found out on the 27th of July 2016 that Eli had passed away, and he was born on the 28th of May. And Suzi also has had an early miscarriage in 2017 that she called Dottie. And I'm Kelly Barnes. I am mum of 11 angels. My losses range from 6 weeks to 21 weeks. Noah was born sleeping at 21 weeks on the 19th of October after finding out the day before that he had passed, and I am the treasurer of the Forget Me Not group. So I suppose just a bit of background on the Forget Me Not group. We're a group of bereaved parents who work alongside the bereavement midwives at the Ulster Hospital to improve bereavement care for families, and we also provide memory-making opportunities, including the annual family day at Streamvale, the remembrance service during baby loss awareness, and also trees in our Forget Me Not woodland at the Billyneal playing fields. Memory-making is extremely important for bereaved families, and the introduction of the proposed baby loss certificate would be an important stage for bereaved families in their journey and also in the grieving process. I believe there's a misconception that early losses have little physical and emotional impact on people, that maybe early loss takes a couple of days and people move on. However, this is a loss of dreams, a loss of a future, loss of potential memories, and a loss of hope, and people do not just move on and get on with things. So from personal experience, I would actually be entitled to 11 baby loss certificates. Each certificate would be just as significant as the next one. When I had Noah, who was born at 21 weeks, it felt like he never existed Unlike some of my earlier losses, I gave birth to Noah, I held Noah, my partner held him, and we have his ashes. However, all we have is a record of a near-in ceremony that the minister did in the hospital. And at the time I found this very difficult to deal with, and it was probably something I was quite angry about. So the introduction of a baby loss certificate would go a long way in offering bereaved families some recognition for their little ones. Mentally, early losses have a similar effect than those later losses, and since my losses I've been diagnosed with PTSD and an anxiety disorder. Although my body has recovered physically, I have a daily mental struggle. In relation to the actual proposed baby loss certificates, it is important that there's no time limit on the certificates and that they can be applied for no matter when the loss. In particular, I can think of a lady, I would go to a service at Christmas time every year, and there's a lady who attends who lost her 2 girls, Zoe and Dawn, in 1983, and she attends every service and speaks at it. So it's just as important for someone who lost yesterday as it is for someone in 1983 or before that. It's also important that medical evidence is not required, given that some of these losses can happen at home and parents don't necessarily go to the GP or the hospital. Again, it's vital that there's no cost, so the certificate can be accessible to all. And both parents hopefully should be able to apply for the certificate so it isn't left to the birthing person. Choice is a big thing for bereaved families. They don't want to have to be forced down a certain route. I also feel it would be quite beneficial to have like a central register, as even down the line it might be important for research purposes, if there is money put into baby loss research, to have that as kind of a figure. So I know England and Scotland both have very good schemes, and it would be good to use these as a base and learn from them. But it is time that all babies are recognised. Rosa matters, Eli and Dottie matter, Matilda and Leonora matter, and Noah and his brothers and sisters matter, and most importantly, they matter equally.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sharing your experience with us and turning your loss into something so important and constructive, which is all of the work that you do and are doing and the evidence you're giving us here today. You talked, and obviously anyone please feel free to give us your experience and your input as well, any of the witnesses. You talked about the importance of memory making. Is that a particular concept that parents who experience early miscarriage, baby loss, talk about that idea of memory making, that you have to formalise, memorialise that life that was lost?
I would say it's for any parent, not just early losses,
Yeah.
later losses too. You know, they talk about, when I had Noah, we had like handprints and footprints and things like that. So you've got those physical memories. But even having that certificate, yeah, it's really important for families to have memories, because like for Noah, I have nothing, you know, there's nothing else really apart from his footprints and his handprints. There's nothing else to say that he existed. We have a tree now at the Billy Neal playing field, which is like his little foot imprint on the planet. But yeah, I mean, everywhere else, you know, he doesn't exist. So it is all, for early losses, all you have is those memories. So it is really important for families to have that.
So, and you mentioned other places, jurisdictions where they've had these. Are you aware of other groups like yourselves and maybe other parts of sort of these islands, and they've found the scheme beneficial? Have you engaged with them, or have you heard about how, if not beneficial, helpful it's been for parents in those places?
It was just really on like media. We've seen people coming out and saying that when the certificate arrives through the postbox, how that made them feel. And as I say, I would be getting 11, so I don't know how I would feel. It's supposed nobody knows how they're going to feel until that comes through the door. But I think for a lot of people, it's kind of
To have that choice,
yeah.
an option, if
You want the choice.
You want, maybe not necessarily everyone will go down that line, or maybe some people initially will decide, oh, I just can't face that right now, but the fact that you don't have to do it within 5 days, or that you can then, whatever length of time it takes, that you feel you can then have that recognition for your little one or little ones.
That's an option, that it's something you can. And do you I mean, I would imagine that for you mentioned the mum who was going to the service every year for a baby who's the year I was born, 1983, and you think that she's carried that for 40 plus years. Imagine this whenever it is implemented, and we're going to try and make that happen as quickly as possible with the minister. There could be a wave of probably emotion whenever people, as you say, start to get those certificates.
I know that mum personally, and even having the services now that weren't there before has really helped her, like, to process what had happened when it was just brushed under the carpet and she was left crying in a corridor, not really, just ignored. Now to be able to acknowledge that grief, and then to have certificates on top of that would just show the recognition that she did have those babies, and she never went on to have any other children, so that she has no, according to the records, she doesn't have any children, you know, so it's very important.
To have that, and to have that recognition of her children, and the fact that she's a mother, and she'll always be a mother. Okay, I'm just going to bring in members. If you do indicate, Diane Forsyth, the Deputy Chair.
Chair, and thank you all very much for coming. And firstly, I'm really sorry for all of your losses, and I just want to say, you know, it takes a lot of strength, and I really thank you for coming and honouring all of their names. You've now read them into the record of, you know, the Hansard and this committee and of the assembly, so it's a really strong thing to do, and a great honour to all of your babies. Just to pick up on what Matthew said about the retrospective nature whenever these come in and the importance of that. I know last year on Baby Loss Awareness Week I'd worked to help set up a wee local group of Mourn Little Legacies down where I live, and we did the baby loss wall, and with some ribbons and a couple of different community groups, and in my office, and there was an awful lot of older people who came forward and just had a lot of conversations with me and with my staff, and about the taboos in the past, and how some of them added their own ribbons, and some of them just went and stood, you know, at the wall. And I think that it will be a really, really important thing going forward to open that. And I just wanted to ask you as to, you know, your opinion whenever it comes forward, and the retrospective nature, like how far should that be, do you think, or how long?
I don't think there should be any cut-off, because for us, we've got, you know, my Leonora, I've had 2 experiences where Matilda, you know, was formally recognised. She was born on the 28th of July and passed away 3 months later. So I have both certificates, whereas for Matilda, but for Leonora, I was 4 months pregnant. I don't have anything, but because of Matilda, Leonora's has a grave and her name is on the gravestone, whereas lots of people don't have that. But I think nowadays we've got, you know, jewellery, we've got little things from Etsy that have all our family's names, sort of like the informal things, whilst the certificates would be fabulous that our little ones' names are in black and white on a formal document, whereas for parents going back all of those years, you know, the internet wasn't here. Some of them maybe never even spoke about the little ones, and even for bringing that conversation to other members of their family and saying, actually, you know, and for it not to be belittled, you know, where it's shoved under, like there's a physical document here, and the name that you chose as well, that you don't get to hear at the doctor's surgery or at the roll call, that their name is actually written in black and white, and that is who they are. I think so. Not having a cut-off point would be really important for those families finally to have a recognition of the little one that belongs to them.
Absolutely, and I think we'll maybe be surprised by how many people come forward, because as you say, whenever it wasn't so much spoken about, there's a whole lot that'll maybe come forward on it. It's something I'm quite conscious of whenever we're looking at this, because, you know, we're looking at black and white and the language of legislation. It's very cold, like we all know that from any type of legislation or procedures, or when you get your medical forms, the language sometimes can just cut right through you in terms of technicalities. And some of the clauses, whenever they're working out, in particular around like early miscarriage, is there any particular language or things that you would recommend? I am quite concerned about that, because if you have to produce a medical record, and I know sometimes you haven't been to a doctor, but you've had an early miscarriage.
Personally, I actually hate the word miscarriage.
Yeah.
I say early loss, but that's personal to me.
No, I've heard that many times, time and again. It just feels like it's your fault, you've carried them wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so different, under 24 weeks. Some of mine were 6 weeks, some are 21 weeks. There's a massive difference in physically what I went through at 6 weeks and what I went through at 21 weeks. Mentally, it probably wasn't that much different. But I think there is a lot about, people seem to be more conscious of language now in relation to baby loss. Personally, for me, loss is a better word than miscarriage.
And do you think leaving it, more open-ended and leaning into that compassion is the more appropriate approach in terms of the drafting? Because, as you say, there's the whole different stage 3 pregnancy there, and the last thing you want to see is like different criteria for different stages of pregnancy, because it brings us back to where we're at, that 24 weeks you get something,
doesn't it?
and then before that you don't, just for the sake of a couple of days. So just keen to take on board any feedback like that whenever we have the opportunity in terms of drafting.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It undermines their values, or their value of that little person, and again being what box do they fit into type thing, when the whole point is it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think as long as it's the same language used and there isn't different language for the different kind of boxes that they fit in, I think like loss can cover any of it. So that's personally why I prefer the word loss. But
no, absolutely, and thank you very, very much. We really appreciate you coming and giving the evidence and helping us as we shape this. As a committee, we're really wanting to bring this forward at pace and really try to help people along with the baby loss certificates. Thank you.
Steve Aiken.
Yeah, speaking from my own position, you never lose the sense of loss. That's anybody even thinks that it's not there. It's still there, and this has triggered me a bit today just having this. But thank you very much indeed for what you've come through. The question I really have is, when we're looking at something that's official piece of documentation, they're looking to see where, the medical evidence or wherever it comes from, and that can be, they've got better, but the very clinical language that's used sometimes is, let's say, it's not conducive to anybody's mental health or well-being, and having been there myself, I know exactly where that is. I think one of the things that I would probably like you all to consider is how it's the early losses, I think, is going to be the issue, because the later loss, actually, that will be quite well documented and that will be able, but it's when it's the early loss piece, because I think the early loss is just as important as the later loss, and it's how we manage to recognise that. But if there isn't a sort of a medical follow-up on the rest of it, how do you think we could probably do something along the lines of, I'm beginning to, while you were talking, I was thinking in my own mind about, can we have an avenue for some form of self-certification or something like that, or something that we could use? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's difficult, because with for example, for me, some of my miscarriages, I did just go to the GP, or some I was in hospital. Others happened very early, and I was at home, and only really myself and my partner knew about it. So it's difficult in that way, because we wouldn't have had medical evidence for those. You just kind of hope that people have a conscience and wouldn't apply for the baby loss certificate if they didn't, if it wasn't applicable to them.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Jerry, Carol.
Thanks very much. Very brave and important contribution. If you don't mind, can I ask some questions about sort of your group, if that's okay? Because I think with this bill passing, you might need more people to kind of work with the likes of yourselves and the important work you do. And I think you said, Kelly, you work with bereavement nurses, if I picked that up correctly. Are you kind of based in one particular sort of trust ward, or are you kind of spread out? Or
We're with the Ulster Hospital.
Southeastern Trust.
Yeah, Southeastern. Yeah.
okay.
A lot of the other trusts do have groups and bereavement midwives.
They all now have bereavement midwives. We were the first trust. I think we were 11 years ahead getting the first bereavement midwife in Northern Ireland, Hilary Patterson. And then, the Forget Me Not group, Bereaved Parent Liaison group, was set up. And again, we were the first liaison group. We're sort of we're sort of slightly separate to the trust, but still within it. So chairperson, treasurer, secretary are all roles that bereaved parents have, so that there's not the power dynamic basically, and that we can then really say how we feel about our experiences, and but then that goes back, and then we can actually make the changes because we've got the people right there that can then change the services or change the language.
It's a really good model. So there's groups like yourselves in every trust, it's just different
I'm not sure if
organisations.
there's every trust.
Every
No, there's
trust,
the
okay.
Snowdrop,
Northern Trust there is. I know the Northern Trust one quite well.
and there's the Snowdrop in
That's
Belfast Trust.
That's Belfast and Northern, I think.
Is
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
We're
Okay.
I
combined.
think there's one in Southern Trust. I'm not 100% sure, but there are bereavement midwives in them all that would have access to bereaved parents who could then link in terms of everyone being, everyone's views coming in, being consulted.
Thank you. I think it's important because obviously the coming together that presumably he's doing a great job today, but outside of meetings like this, so I think it'd be important with obviously an uptake in certificates. Then there's groups, and it's not your responsibility, but there's groups in place to support sort of parents. And Kelly, you talked about a sort of central register being important. Do you want to just maybe expand?
Well, I know
upon that, if you
Scotland has the the memorial book, but it's more just something where it can be recorded how many certificates and I suppose details about that could probably just the details of who it's gone to. I don't know whether it's just asking parents for their consent that their details are included on a register somewhere. It just means because miscarriages aren't recorded anywhere. There is no, we say 1 in 4, but it could be a lot more than that. It could be a lot less than that. But there's nowhere it's being recorded. So maybe down the line, if there is money put into research or whatever, then you've got the backing of figures to say, well, this is how many people this is affecting. So it's just something.
And is it like a certain, for example, has a certain event happened, or is it to do with people living in a certain area, to do with, I don't know, environmental things, or certain, I don't know, genetic issues that are within a certain community, things like that. If you have all, this would be the time to gather the data, and anyone who's gone through it would love to be able to have a way of trying to support it, that not happening as widespread as it is, so to actually have the data available and then it's there for someone to.
And I wrote down here that to remember for everybody who's lost, but also to prevent a trauma for people. So that's what I was taking from when you were saying about the register, Kelly. So that's really important. I mean, obviously, part of the bill, I have 2 other questions. Part of the bill is to make the registration sort of digital process, and you don't have to go into any personal information or details, but presumably that's going to make a very traumatic process sort of easier for people, not having to go into council
I
offices.
think that's so positive. But my husband went down to do, my daughter was stillborn, and he went down to register her birth and death on the same certificate, and because the death became before the birth, then on the certificate I just couldn't face it. So I just think if he wasn't able to face that, then it's just what do you do then? So when I read that, I was really pleased about that, because it gives people the option then as to whether maybe they want to go down in person, but then it's maybe less traumatic that it's, you know, electronically done or via phone and passes to the funeral director via the registrar rather than yourself and all for the funeral. So it's just, I think that's a really positive move.
Thank you. A final thing for me just is to say that obviously, like, the certificates are important, and like I support it, the bill sort of as it is, but is there any concern, maybe the wrong word, but any knowledge or there may be gaps in the services? So obviously you talk about the bereavement nurses and important role that they provide, but is there anywhere where the trusts could be providing additional support?
Mental health.
Okay.
Mental health.
Because obviously that exists probably now and for all sorts of different circumstances, but I would not have a concern, but you know, so many people may be coming forward, which is a positive thing if they want to. If the trusts aren't putting in appropriate support, then it could leave people in a difficult position. So
sort of already there at the minute, unfortunately, where even people who aren't, you know, being triggered by receiving a certificate, people whose little ones are passing away now, there's unfortunately minimal support in terms of counselling, maybe more of a psychology type route, but a lot just need the counselling and very specialist counselling, not a general counsellor, somebody with a real niche in baby loss. And also for the dads, you know, we find that Southeastern Trust is very positive for the mums and tries with the dads, you can go together, but actually there isn't a service for the daddies, and they are then left, and unfortunately then that has an impact in terms of relationships. We're then parents to other children, the little ones coming through, so there's all of us have found a huge gap. And whenever Suzi and I went, we had a bereavement midwife counselling, but now we haven't that service. Basically the person retired, and that hasn't been filled yet, and then there's never been anything for the dads, which, I mean, Matilda be 12 now, so you know.
There is the likes of SANS and those kind of organisations, which I imagine if there is the uptake, they will probably do some kind of publicity about what their what services they offer. But yeah, it's already in a dire situation with the mental health.
These groups like SANS and yourselves are charities or volunteers, which are doing great work, but only get so much funding and support. But thanks very much. Thank you.
Deirdre.
Yeah, no, and again, thanks very much just for sharing your experience and obviously the loss of your children that you have all mentioned here today. And I suppose it is a very emotive topic, and just when you're talking, I know it's not uniquely just to women, but obviously there's been a history across this island of disgraceful treatment of women in health and children in health. You know, when you look at things like mother and baby homes, forced adoptions, all of those, institutional abuse and stuff. And obviously, you know, there's a legacy there, and as you say, there's still an under-resourcing of healthcare provision and access around mental health provision and other things, even the mother and baby unit, which is in the media this week. So that goes without saying, and obviously we're looking at this from a technical point of view, but I think Diane's point's right. It's important that we hear the voices of parents, because we want to understand how this, when it's implemented, what it looks like out on the ground. And how it impacts on families. And just as you're talking, I mean, I have a condition that I'm prone, I'll use the medical term, to miscarriages due to that medical condition, and I have miscarried. And I suppose the only acknowledgement that I had was the initial hospital letter for your scan. That's not to say I don't know if I would want it. So again, you're right, that thing of choice I think is critical, and the acknowledgement for those who feel that they want that. And that's why I was interested in terms of the time limit, because I remember going to an event in Belfast City Hall. They do it every year as well in terms of baby loss. And as you say, there are people maybe who came. I remember one woman came for the first time and she lost her baby in the 70s. And I know even where I grew up in South Belfast, I know a lot of particularly mothers that have, you know, encountered a loss, they suppress it. It's not talked about, and that's part, I think, of the history and the legacy, again, of this island, and how particularly women have been treated, where they just don't talk about it. but there's a change in their behaviour, maybe around that month and that time period. And I would have friends, you know, where their parents have talked about this. My own mother, you know, she lost her firstborn after he was born, and then she's had multiple miscarriages, but she doesn't talk about it really. And there is that generation, so I think it is keen, you know, that we do look at that issue of the time limit as we're moving through this legislation. And I think I was going to ask the same question just in terms of the example of the central register in England and Wales, and I think we can, you know, ask for more information on that as well, just from the Assembly. But I suppose it was that issue around, I mean, you have an organised group. I'm conscious that there's probably swathes of people out there, you know, that aren't even aware that there are support groups. Just carry on. And obviously, as you know, there's more awareness about this. I was going to ask around what you feel the need for awareness raising will be, because obviously the legislation we're looking at is to give an enabling power to bring forward a scheme, and we would be keen, obviously, which I know the Minister has said that he'll want to co-design what that even looks like, you know, with people who have been directly impacted. But I suppose just what you would see then is the need for awareness raising as we're moving through this. And I do think at some point it's something that we can be encouraging the Minister to engage with the Health Minister as the scheme does begin to come live, or even at the design stage, that there's that cross-departmental working, you know, because you say this can re-traumatise, it can bring people back to that point. And while even though it's a good thing that's being done, you know, the acknowledgement and the choice, but just making sure then, you know, could additional supports be put in at that period then as it goes live. So I'm just keen to, you know, with the work that you're doing, I mean, obviously you are a support group, but, you know, is that across the board? Do you think that there are big gaps in that?
We're actually not a support group, we're a bereaved parent liaison group. Right. But so we're a bit different to, say, SANS, who they have their support meetings. Ours is all about trying to get change in the service and to suppose support parents with the Remembrance Service and wreath making, so coming together for events, but we're very much about change, and then we happen to all support each other while we're doing it. But SANS would be the main support.
You know, there's even when certificates are being sent out, there's probably not, you know, you could probably put not necessarily leaflets, but even a page in with that, with the list of organisations that do support, that do offer support. I don't see, I mean, I wouldn't take acceptance of that if I got the certificate through the post. I wouldn't.
It is different in different areas. I think every area does have SANS, but I don't know how often their meetings are.
Some areas have like local groups that would only be in the local area, whereas SANS would cover obviously more widespread. But yeah, I wouldn't see a problem about putting a leaflet or a page or something in to say what support services are available.
Yeah, sure, come back. And I suppose the thing is, I mean, we've been calling it up until now the baby loss certificate, and as you say, language can be important, even you know how people kind of view it. So would you agree with that general term then? There would be, yeah. Okay, no, thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Deirdre. Owen.
Thank you, Chair. And can I just add my sympathy to all of you for the losses that you've experienced, and my thanks as well for coming and sharing what is really personal testimony and shining the light on an issue that, as Deirdre said, I think there's been too much silence around for far too long. So it is really deeply appreciated, and the evidence so far, I'm sure everybody will agree, has already been really useful and made me think of a few issues that I hadn't fully considered in advance of this session. My first question is really just to sort of take it back to basics in terms of the certificate. You touched on the language with Diane, but is there anything specifically about the content of a certificate or the appearance of a certificate that you think you would like to see reflected as part of a scheme?
I think it needs to look reasonably official. Just like a birth certificate. And there needs to be space for the baby's name, where the baby was born, and you know, if applicable, you don't necessarily have to fill in those sections, and even dates. Some will have dates of birth for under 24 weeks. Others may not necessarily know the exact date. So I think just quite similar to a birth certificate.
but flexible in terms of what you're actually entering into it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And just in terms of, and Deirdre may have touched on this as well, you had mentioned, Claire, that every family will be different and every family will want different things. And I guess one of the things that I've been reflecting on a little bit is how best we communicate the availability and the option of a certificate. You know, so if somebody's experienced a loss, and how do we best raise with families that that option exists, I guess is my question. So is it that maybe their GP, if they're aware, can let them know that it's an option, or is it a broader awareness campaign? Like, how best do we communicate with those people that are affected that that option is there for them if they want to avail of it?
Yeah, well, if you have the loss in hospital, you're going to have the bereavement midwives who can obviously give you advice. There could be leaflets that could be put in that can be left in hospital waiting rooms.
The back of the book, do you know the book that you're given whenever you find out you're pregnant or whatever, and you're given this book? It could be at the back, because there is a section that does say losing your baby, you know, so it's not that they're running from that anyway, but if it was actually there, to let you know. Also the campaign, you know, at the moment it's been in the media, you know, that this is happening, and I suppose when it does happen soon, that then there's a big, you know, a lot of information put in the media
and I think
about
it's
it, and then people will.
There's still not a lot there. Like, I know a friend who miscarried in, for want of a better term, had a loss in January, and I told her what I was doing today, and she says, does that mean I get one too? I could cry, thank you for doing this. And she wasn't aware that could happen, and that was just this year. So there's a lot of people won't know still about this.
Yeah. Well,
I think if it's implemented, though, I think it's probably down to like the GPs and like the bereavement midwives to kind of push it forward, and hopefully people that have had ones previously will become aware of it through, you know, the likes of remembrance services and things. We can certainly put leaflets out, and we have social media and stuff as well. And SANS, I imagine, will probably do some kind of social media.
Again.
No, absolutely. My final question then, just Chair, is given your understanding of the bill that's been proposed to date and the engagement that you've had on that, is there anything in particular that you feel that you want to draw the committee's attention to, or anything in terms of amendment that you think that the committee should be thinking about as we go about our work?
We looked at this is the briefing thing at the end. It's not actually part of the bill, sure it's not. But we just didn't like the words of it at the end. It was just like, what was it saying? Often a difficult moment in time, or
it's a significant moment, or
significant or
difficult
often
moment,
difficult moment.
And we thought that was quite
like throwaway.
You know where that was in the explanatory memorandum or in the bill itself? Do you know? You don't know?
We just know it was in.
I think it was in the briefing.
Like the last sentence
document.
in the briefing, but it's just, again, it's a wording of something, you know, that's not in our lives. This is something that affects us day in, day out. Like the loss of my child is affecting every area of my life. It's not a difficult moment in my life, you know, it's everything. It's affected every part of me, you know, so it's distressing is a good word.
We all picked up on that, actually.
And all of us said
that's
it.
one word that just then, and that's what you were saying about the language, actually, to have bereaved parents like casting their eye over everything. Everyone is so different, though. Again, not well, we were all united on that one, but somebody might find something okay and acceptable, another person, but having a range of people actually casting their eyes over the language of just how does that feel, would be really so beneficial. We feel if you would be able to do that, that'd be wonderful.
You know, it's really helpful. If it is in the explanatory memo, it's definitely something that I think we can take away as a committee and look at. No, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Everyone else has indicated that they wish to ask a question. So I suppose before we conclude the session, I just wanted to give anyone the opportunity to share any further observation, experience. You can obviously follow up with us, of course, in writing. This is going on for another few weeks, so any other thoughts that occur to people. But if there's any other feedback you want to give us, or
to be
thoughts.
honest, I don't know if this is still the case, but whenever I got my certificate for Rosa being stillborn, it wasn't a birth to me. It was horrendous that her death and her birth was on the same page. You know, it's just like I haven't looked at it since this day. Now I can't even begin to realise how the pain that Kelly has, that her child Noah and all her other children don't have any recognition. I'm, there is one for better word, lucky to have that form. But the fact that the death and birth are recorded on the same page is traumatic to me, and I know I must not be the only one.
It's distressing, and that just makes it more distressing. Susie, you're the same.
I remember being totally confused when Ryan came home and we only had one certificate. But I didn't know. Do you know, I was blind to it, and I was so confused for...
Well, imagine.
Yeah.
That's something else that we can focus. That's related, but it's not directly covered by this bill. But that's something else we can follow up on with the registrar.
Okay.
Okay. No one else has indicated they wish to ask a question. At this stage, I just want to say thank you so much for coming in, giving us evidence, and sharing your experiences. Has been obviously very difficult for all of you, but you're obviously so brave, and you are turning extraordinary trauma into something very positive and constructive, and we thank you for your evidence. I think members of this committee who have shared their own experience and their own hurt, I think have all found it useful as legislators, but also as human beings. Thank you very much for coming and talking to us, and keep in touch.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much, guys. We'll keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much. And we'll follow up on those points. Members, we're just going to have a very quick comfort break, I think, and then we will come back in a minute or two and do matters arising.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber.
Just turn it. Pause it. It's really quite slow.
4, 5, 6.
Really slow.
That's us back now. Okay, just a brief pause there after our evidence from the group there. It was very useful, and I think there's a couple of specific points from Forget Me Not that we need to follow up on. One, I think that illustrates the value of doing these sessions, even if it's a short committee stage. I think the particular point that was made, we think about the text of the explanatory and financial memorandum, but I think we will feed back to the department and refer to them to the Hansard transcript of the evidence we got about the importance of being careful with language, both in relation to how the event, the baby loss, is described, but also that it isn't just an event or a moment in time or some kind of medical issue that comes and passes. It's a permanent trauma and scar for these families, particularly the mums, and also the specific point, I think, with the registrar specifically that was made by Suzi about, in the case of stillbirths, the fact that you effectively get a kind of a 2-in-1 certificate that is particularly jarring, and whether there's anything that can be done or that's been looked at, sort of decoupling or thinking about that in the particularly kind of harsh way that it makes parents feel in that case. I think in general, it will, related to both of those, but particularly the first point, we should highlight the Hansard transcript to the department as it is producing the consultation to say, be very mindful of language, because this whole process is about creating a memorialisation and acknowledgement of the loss of these babies. So it's really important that the consultation does not add inadvertently to any kind of pain or sense of trauma, when it's the whole purpose of the policy is to do the opposite and to help the healing process and the feeling of meaning attached to the loss of their baby. So it's just thank members who contributed to that session and did very thoughtfully, and particularly to the witnesses who were so human and brave. Thank you, members. Okay.
Sorry, Chair,
Go ahead, Steve.
I'm just looking at some of the actions. I think the interesting one is about maybe writing to the Health Committee about the central registry, because that's
yes, apologies. Thank you. Yeah, I did forget that one. Yeah, there's an additional action which is around.
The other one, maybe to the
catch-up,
Health
sorry.
Committee.
To the Chair.
I don't know whether the Health Committee or to the Department for Health. Seems to be, we weren't sure whether there are bereavement midwives in all the sort of health trusts.
Sure, there are.
All right, sorry.
When we looked at this in Baby Loss Awareness Week last year, we realised there was a bereavement midwife in each of the trusts, and we had one particular bereavement midwife worked with the committee, but they are in all the trusts. Just there's not support groups or liaison groups in all the trusts, so that's an issue.
Maybe just through the Chair,
Okay.
one of the things we might say I think it is a matter for the Health Committee, but if I would suggest that they might consider looking at there's a common approach across all the trusts. You would think there was, but it doesn't sound as if there is.
That's a fair question to ask the Health Committee, and just say they must come out of our evidence. Jerry, I want to come in and then.
And just on that, kind of, if we can tease out, if we don't have it already, kind of the support services that exist in the trust. Yeah. It sounds like southeastern. Is that where they're from? It sounds pretty good, but it doesn't sound as strong as that elsewhere. And
yeah,
I think there's work for the Department of Health in particular, but others to do. So if we can get that information, that'll be
we can flag it. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, Chair, I just wondered, bereavement midwives, have we liaised with them in terms of potential written evidence for this?
We've been in contact, because we'd already got contact with one, and we've written to all the bereavement midwives across the trusts. They were part of that initial group of letters that went out before the call for evidence. So we've been in contact.
Okay, great. So we have those actions now, members. Just as an addendum to that item, if you go to page 31 of the tabled pack, there's a written submission from Belfast City Council on the bill. The council has indicated that it is no specific comment on the content of the bill. And is content with the same, although that response needs to be ratified by council, i.e. the elected members, I presume. However, the council has brought two related suggestions to the committee's attention, asking the department to consider allowing for a long-form death certificate to be issued free of charge to bereaved parents in the case of a stillbirth, and that the department considers waiving the fee for marriage certificates in circumstances where, whether the department considers waiving the fee for marriage certificates in circumstances where one of the parties to be married is terminally ill with a very limited life expectancy. So on the first one of those, I think we can tie it into the question that arose from Suzi's evidence around the stillbirth, what happened to the certificate you get after a stillbirth. On the second point, it's obviously slightly more ancillary point about registration in general, but it's another very sensitive matter. I'm happy for us, if members are content, that we ask the department that question in relation to people who are getting married, or one of either one of the spouses is terminally ill. So I'm happy for us to ask that question. Okay, so if members are agreed, we'll forward that to the department for a response. Okay, now we're going to go back and do our matters arising, I believe, and thank everyone for their patience. Oh yes, sorry. If members are content, we will include the council's response to us in our written evidence and the report on the bill. Okay, if I can find what page I'm supposed to be at. We're going back to matters arising, and yes, we are the first several matters arising relate to the fun subject which detained us last week, and we will, I think, spend a little more time on, which is the legislative consent motion issue. We have, this is slightly out of order, but we're going to do them collectively. Items 5.4 to 5.7 are the issues related to the data use and access bill, and the, to put it diplomatically, unusual situation we have been presented with. In front of you is a Hansard exchange. So yeah, we are. This is we've got two things that have been circulated to you. One is a letter from the Speaker to myself as Chair about the issue to do with LCMs. The second is an exchange in Parliament between Robin Swan, MP for Southampton, and the ex-minister, and Chris Bryant, who is a minister now. Is that exchange today? Or in
that was yesterday. It was the 3rd of June, Chair.
Okay, fair enough.
There's the process around amendment of the bill will take place throughout this week. I think there was multiple days. They call it ping pong. Where it's Lords and Commons, it becomes more complex when you have the two.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's happening a number of days this week.
Okay. So so I'm going to ask the clerk just to give us an update in relation to various LCM bits, because they're different moving items. But I am quite keen that we have we crystallise this first with an evidence session ourselves at some point in the next couple of weeks. But the clerk's going to give us.
So, Chair, members have the response from the Speaker. The Speaker's indicated he's going to write to the Minister, and we'll remind all executive ministers that this was raised as an issue in November, and this was one of the bills that was highlighted at the time. The exchange in Parliament is there's a level of perhaps correction of that. The Minister indicates, the relevant UK Government Minister indicates that everything is in hand and that there will be a process. A memorandum has been laid, but there's been no motion. The memorandum members saw last week contained a draft motion, but no motion has been laid. No motion can now be laid as a consent motion because that is now past the post. Yeah. What Business Office have advised the Minister could do, should he wish, is lay a motion that notes the progress of the bill and general consent for the bill, but a consent motion itself, as per the legislative consent motion process, cannot be laid because it's past the post for that. The Assembly cannot give consent to something that's already passed, but can note process and comment on it. So it was just that clarification from the Business Office. Obviously the Speaker will have to deal with any request for a motion, but the reference in Parliament suggests that motion had been laid. There's a draft motion, it was within a memorandum, so no motion has actually been laid technically. So it'll be up to the Minister to decide how he wishes to proceed with that. But the Speaker's Office will obviously advise him when there's engagement there, but it's just to make it very clear that it can't be a legislative consent motion.
The Chair.
Okay, one second. Sorry, just so we're clear, we are the position of bringing the second state. The position of the Speaker's Office is that this cannot now be a legislative consent motion, so that is not going to happen. I think we are proceeding on the basis that, as we discussed last week, we won't be giving a view on a legislative. We won't be giving a view because we couldn't in any way do the requisite scrutiny. It's also important to say, I think, and probably right, that Robin Swan was asking questions about it, albeit it's also important to say, and I think it's always important to say these things in relation to LCMs. He asks in the question, he asks for clarification about the implication of LCMs not being in place for those businesses and individuals. It won't have any impact because LCMs are effectively advisory mechanisms unless the UK government decides that it wants to disapply parts of the law, and there's no indication that it does that. But as the clerk also said, the Minister's response is also problematic, to put it mildly, because he indicates that legislative consent is in train and it isn't. So
possibly just the other thing I should point out is that he also references royal assent, and members are already aware that that's not relevant in this case. Royal assent is simply the end of the process. It doesn't indicate the end point where everything is still a moving part until then. Yeah.
So I'm just going to run through a few of the other bits on legislative consent, and I think there's one particular action I want us to agree to, and then we can have a discussion on other matters rising. So just so people understand what's in the pack, I'm not saying we need to go through these all in turn and have individual discussions on them, but we just so people can understand what's in the pack. 5.4 is a raised paper on legislative consent motions, which was originally, these are old, they're not old, they're still relevant and live, but they're completed some time ago. 5.4 is a raised paper on legislative consent motion, which explains the basics of legislative consent motions, which arise from what's called the Sewell Convention, and legislative consent, which is that the UK Parliament will not normally legislate in areas of devolved power, unless it has the consent of the relevant devolved legislature, but with the addendum that it has done that many times, certainly in the Brexit process, and that convention, I'm giving personal commentary here, that convention has been slightly less in the Brexit years. I think it's fair to say slightly less adhered to, but it is an important convention. 5.5 is a Committee of Procedures report on legislative consent motions from February 2022. 5.6 is a raised paper on legislative consent motions for September 2020. 5.7 is a raised paper from way back in February 2009, 16 years ago, which is about legislative consent in the NI Assembly and other legislatures. I'm not suggesting we should have a broad academic discussion on those papers now, but they are important. I think the upshot is that the legislative consent process has broken down in quite a dramatic way here, and to the extent that it is not entirely clear the Department of Finance, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, had a baldy notion what it was doing. To be quite honest, the Speaker has indicated pretty robustly in his letter to us that Assembly scrutiny has been compromised. I think there arises a specific question about competence. I don't mean legal competence, I mean competence as kind of both at a civil service and a legislative sense about our competence in terms of doing scrutiny and seriousness about the legislative consent process specifically. So I think it's really important that we get evidence from the department, specifically the Permanent Secretary. We may have to burden our clerk team to organise that out with the bounds of a normal Wednesday meeting, unless
we may have an option. Okay. Chair, we have a scheduled briefing as part of the department's service brochure, where we have the relevant deputy secretary coming up to the committee. That's already scheduled. Yeah. And if members were willing, we could request that he is accompanied by the permanent secretary and they deal with this issue.
Yeah. When is that?
Before he goes into. Is it? I'm just going to ask is that next week? That's next week. It's scheduled for next week. Now, the only issue with that is it's not on camera. It's down at the Ulster Studio.
I think it's quite important that we have a properly public session.
So we may then need to look at the other options.
Our members, first of all, our members agree that we invite the Permanent Secretary, first of all, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, yes. we looked at, we've got service brochure in twice here in the board work plan.
Yeah, there are going to be 3 occasions, so it breaks down into 3 parts.
Okay.
So the first part will be next week, and that's around IT and everything relating to that, and then there'll be 2 subsequent parts as well.
Would you want to wait to one of the subsequent ones where you're actually in an open session up here to bring the need?
Potentially, though I do want to, though,
do a separate.
I think it might be, so can I ask that the clerk team come back and correspond with us either via WhatsApp or email to advise of the timing of a meeting? I do think it's important we do this promptly, given I think there would be an expectation that we crystallise and understand exactly what's happened in this process before this bill drifts off into, particularly because it is proceeding through its last stages at Westminster, and a British government minister is saying that the legislative consent process is in hand. Well, no, it's insert adjective not, and I think we need to properly do that in public and talk about that and scrutinise that with the Permanent Secretary of the Department sooner rather than later. So can I ask if we can just establish a time that works? Are members content with that? Ideally in the next week or 2. Steve Aiken.
Just to the Chair. Minister Bryant has written to the MP and saying basically there isn't a problem and it's all going smoothly.
Yeah, I think he said it in the chamber to your colleague.
I know he did.
Yeah.
But, the record's going to have to be corrected. So that's, and I understand it's is it in the House of Lords yet?
It will go into both Commons and Lords as it goes through the amending process.
There's an issue here. The Lord Speaker is going with the process that says all legislative consent has been sorted, VG tick, where it very clearly hasn't.
I mean, I think that, although having said that, that's kind of just a question for him correcting if there's a Westminster process.
If it corrects the record, it'll correct the record, but depends where it is in the system. I think it's a problem.
I don't think him correcting the record will have anything to do with the legal status of the bill, though.
No, okay.
No,
to be honest,
the process is the process.
There's not going to be a legislative. This bill is not going to. It cannot have legislative consent from Stormont, basically.
We should at least get the record corrected. Yeah.
But I think we do need to possibly think about writing to the to that department and asking, I don't know which department it is. Is it
He'd be the relevant minister taking
is
that
it
forward, so he'd be
business and
covering
trade
that.
or whatever it's called?
Originated in the Lords, it's more complex, but we'll check on
I think it
that.
might be what I was doing a letter just explaining that we have not given, that will not happen, and
Chris Bryant.
I think so. Yeah, we should write to Chris Bryant and flag that, or potentially write to the NIO and flag. I don't know what the right process would be.
Let me check with the business office.
I think we need to write
they're
to
the ones who monitor all this,
Yeah.
so let me check with them what our process
I think we
is.
either write to the NIO
supposed to
or
be.
Mr. Bryant's department to inform them that that is not a true statement. I'm not saying it's untrue. I'm not accusing him of saying anything deliberately misleading. I just think
Innovation and
it's
technology.
science, innovation, and technology. Okay, that department changes a lot.
Okay.
Okay, so our actions are, as well as going away and reading up on legislative consent motions, so we can ask appropriate questions when they have the Permanent Secretary. We're going to have the Permanent Secretary in front of us in the next couple of weeks to establish what went wrong here. We are going to correspond with the British government either via the NIO or DCIT to establish what went wrong, or to clarify that the position of the Finance Committee certainly is that we won't be able to give legislative consent. People content with those actions? Yep. Grand. Okay. And I look forward to, we'll have lots of constitutional geekery reading the various reports on legislative consent motions. Okay, members, we're going to go back to other matters arising. Item 5.1 is the strategic review of rating. There is terms of reference on the review of the small business rate relief and non-domestic vacant rating. That's at page 65. The Minister has provided the committee with an advanced copy of the terms of reference for the review of the SBRR and non-domestic vacant rating. The Department has already started to engage with key stakeholders ahead of the formal review process outlined in the terms of reference. We will be getting a briefing at some point, and if members are agreed, we'll schedule that briefing. The only question I suppose would be, we might want to reference this actually to the thing we talked about with Hospitality Ulster, which is the licensed premises relief that exists across the water but not here, and see if that is being looked at. It's not specifically referenced in the terms of reference. Okay, members content, and then we'll come in that. Next is UK Finance Banking Inquiry follow-up points. That's page 83. Following the oral evidence session with the major banks on the 9th of April, UK Finance was asked to provide further information on how the FCA scrutinises bank branch closure activity. UK Finance has provided a copy of the Access to Cash sourcebook, as well as a copy of the FCA's branch and ATMs closures or conversions finalised guidance. UK Finance also indicates that a response to the committee's query in respect of Lisnaskey, I think I've got a casework done, I need to get better at that, will be provided shortly. Highlight to members, I shouldn't be reading out that bit of the script. So members, we will get responses from the banks to the committee queries that we asked a few weeks ago. They are still to come, as are, I presume, the questions from FCA.
Yes, so I spoke to the UK Finance this morning. We have already received responses from 2 banks that will be in next week's pack, and those are more of those to come. And the further questions we asked from the UK Finance will be clarified going forward, and so will those to the FCA. Yeah. So that's all still to come in, and as we get those, we'll bring them forward to committee to get members' permission to put that into our evidence bank. Okay. 5.3, so if members are content, we will that the response will be added to our Banking and Financial Services Inquiry report once we get it from UK Finance. Okay, agreed. 5.3 is Advice NI, extending the remit of the DFC bereavement service. That's at page 202 of the meeting pack. We have been copied into correspondence to the Finance Minister from Advice NI and Marie Curie regarding ongoing work to share registered death information in a more systematic way, simplifying it for bereaved people. So both organisations now wish to explore the legal and resource gateways in order to extend the remit of the bereavement service, and are seeking a meeting with the Minister and officials to discuss this further. I think this is something we might want to look at whenever we hear more about it, because obviously I think I'm right in saying the Tell Me Once kind of approach is a bit more advanced across the water than it is here on this. So, but we'll get more whenever we get the response from the Minister. Okay. The next is I had the Hansard transcript on the Data Use and Access Bill from last week's oral evidence session, which we have and we've just discussed. That is, we've already discussed his position on the LCM. Okay, that's all our matters arising. The next agenda item, we'll move to correspondence. 13 for an SL1.
Oh, pardon me, we have to do an SL1. Yep. It's come back to the SL one that we touched on earlier on. This is agenda item 8. Sorry to move around the agenda a bit, folks. It's the Public Service, Civil Service and Other Pension Amendment Regulation, Northern Ireland 2025, consultation response on scheme yield member contributions. It's the page 380 of the pack. Committee was previously advised by the Department of a consultation on adjustments to NICS employee contributions to meet the required scheme yield. This was as a result of the current under-yield position for the next pension scheme, the cost of which was estimated to be $2 million per year. Members also needed information from the Department about its engagement with relevant stakeholders. Consultation is now closed, and the committee has been provided with a copy of a report. Most respondents agreed with it. The relevant correspondence. So the Department advises the committee is now proceeding to make the necessary legislative amendments, and the correspondence is at page 383. The proposed statutory rule is, as I said, the Public Service, Civil Service and Others Pension Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2025. It will increase employee contribution bands in order to meet the required employee contribution scheme yield. So that is what it does. The rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure before the Assembly. A clerk's cover note, relevant correspondence and full details of the proposed rule can be found at page 3880 to 391 of the meeting pack. Members, are you content with a broad policy proposal for a statutory rule to enable the Department of Finance to increase employee contribution bands in order to meet the required employee contribution scheme yield, or if they require any further information? Members broadly content? Jerry Carroll.
Yeah, Chair, just I think going through the responses, I think there's been quite a lot of opposition, I think, certainly from NIPSA, if not others, and I think there's probably almost a third of respondents who are certainly not jumping about the proposal, if not outright opposed to it, so that doesn't seem to be consensus from my reading of it. And I know we've got some of the responses quoted from NIPSA in particular, but I don't know if we saw a set of their full response. Maybe that was in a previous pack. So so I've just got some concerns about this, and obviously with these things normally quoted back that it's a small addition every month that people have to pay, but I don't know why the employer isn't making this up, and I have some issues with this going through with such high level of, if not opposition, and certainly at the very least concern about it. So I don't know whether we should just wave it through, or maybe we should be a bit more scrutinise it a bit more.
Well, it basically, I think it's exactly right, Jerry, that we do ask the question because there's not huge sums of money, but they are actual sums of money. They're, if you are an executive officer, which is not the most junior grade, but a kind of junior to middle grade, it's about a sort of $5 a month type reduction based on one of the options they put forward. So I think it is a legitimate question. Does anybody else wish to come in or make a point about it? Members, obviously, let me just check the nature of this rule. Is it draft affirmative? Does it have to come back? Or do we?
It's negative resolution. So
okay.
it would be a case of ultimately if it was made, but we're only at SL1 stage, so we're feeding back to the policy proposal. But in terms of negative resolution, that would be a prayer of annulment if it went through.
Yes. Okay. So, members, I think at this stage, all we're being asked to do is really give our indicative view one way or the other. I'm content that we indicate there was some concern from members around the fact that there's additional. Members note the purpose of the overall scheme, or the purpose of the overall change to address yields, but note there is some concern about asking, even if it's relatively modest amounts, actually it's still effectively a pay cut for civil servants, public servants, because you're effectively taking a small amount out of their wages every month, which is meaningful.
Thanks, happy to Chair, and also if we can get that NIPSA submission, I don't think it was in the pack.
It would be helpful to get the NIPSA submission, and we could ask NIPSA there. We could ask NIPSA any other relevant.
Can we get the maybe it was in the paper, but it certainly didn't jump out at me. The rationale is why so there's a percentage increase for most. Is there a department reason why they can't make it up? Presumably, we'll be told finances are tight, but I think the department should be asked that question as a bare minimum.
Yes, as Sparks are saying, it's not a, you couldn't fund, it probably wouldn't be legally, you wouldn't be legally allowed to just take it out of public spend, it's because it's a pension scheme. I don't think you couldn't just take the money out and say, like, we'll just take it out of the budget. It would just be so I think it's,
Can we ask that?
we can certainly ask the question if you want to get it, we'll get it on the record.
Chair, just to be clear on how that works.
Yes.
Dr. Aiken.
Yeah, go ahead.
Matthew, sorry, Chair. One of the issues, I'm just reading this and looking at the actuarial rates and the rest of it. This is because the Treasury says we need to make up the shortfall to bring it up. But the other issue is we haven't resolved yet things like McLeod, and we haven't resolved things like holiday pay. Can we ask the question whether is this going to be a precedent? So if the issue is going to be how do we make up McLeod, is their answer going to be we increase the contributions from the team? I'm just looking at that now and trying to look at how the figures work out, and I'm thinking, okay, if that's how we're making up the shortfall for that, will that then set a precedent for McLeod and holiday pay?
I don't know, and they're not quite the same thing. But
no, they're not quite the same thing. But it's interesting because they're saying this is a shortfall in the process. This is a shortfall in the overall figures, and Treasury is saying that it's to be made up by however the Northern Ireland Civil Service does it.
Holiday pay will be a payment rather than anything through that.
Okay. And we can ask to clarify, as though I don't know, when you say precedent, I'm not sure. This is a policy decision, so rather than it doesn't create a legal precedent, I don't think. But anyway, I think we can just ask those questions and say that they can, and then seek a specific response from NIPSA.
Yeah.
I think
just to make sure, and maybe for Jerry as well. So as they, in the rationale, it quite clearly said, so the Treasury said it's over to you, Northern Ireland Civil Service, to sort it out. So it just, that's a bit different from how they normally do it.
Okay. Just in terms of time scale, I'm just thinking of shortcutting this, because if the committee enters into correspondence, we go through the normal data readout process, it'll take time. Yeah. Would members be content if we try and organise a briefing for next week?
Yeah, that makes sense.
We should be able to get the officials up, like it's already, they've already compiled their information, should be able to get
I think that makes sense, but we can probably get
it's going to be down at Studio Ulster, but we can seek to Hansard it should members choose.
We can probably get NIPSA and PCS to correspond relatively quickly.
We should be able to get that fairly quickly with that.
Next week's Hansard, is it?
That's the thing, we can bring Hansard down to do that.
We didn't see the response. So the responses are, well, there's some response from individuals, NIPSA, the FDA, which is the more senior civil servants, Civil Service Pensioners Alliance, Community and Other Trade Union, and an anonymous stakeholder. Ominous. Anyway, it wasn't you, was it? Yeah, you would have figured. Anyway.
I forgot to make a declaration of interest. I'm the chair of your pension fund.
No,
right.
Okay. Order. We'll get all those points and we'll get the specific trade union responses.
Members we'll try and get a briefing next week, because it's the fastest way, I think, to probably get the answers. And I know there's a time scale the department's working to with the SR.
Let's do that. Thank you. Okay. Now we're going to move, I think, to correspondence, and we only have a couple, hopefully, items of correspondence. 10's correspondence, agenda item 10. First is public sector pay guidance. The department has recently published, as is page 433, the department has recently published the public sector pay and pay remit approvals guidance. The approach remains that pay awards must be affordable within each department's 2025-26 budget settlement. The approach also states that consideration should be given to how awards can be targeted to address low pay and where possible the payment of the real living wage, and includes the principle of fairness, which should also be given appropriate consideration in setting awards for senior executives. So that is for members to note, unless anybody wishes to make a specific comment. This is not actually, this is guidance rather than the actual settlement, to be clear. Okay, members are content. Item 10.2 is from the department. It's consultation on equality and disability action plans. It's page 436 of the meeting pack. The department has launched a 12-week consultation on draft equality and disability action plans 25 to 30. That's the note. 10.3 is Executive Office Period Products Free Provision Act. The Executive Office, page 436. The Executive Office has published a report reviewing and reporting on the operations of provisions of sections 1 and 2 of the Period Products Free Provision Act NI 2022. Sets out the availability of free products, including requiring next departments to specify such a duty for their public bodies and legislation. In relation to the Department of Finance, it has now public service bodies and is therefore not obliged to bring forward such regulations. So that's to note, but I would just...
There should be no public service.
It is no, sorry.
That's
It is no,
just
it's
a typo.
confusing myself.
Sorry,
It is
Chair,
no
it's a
public service
typo.
bodies. I'll just note that, commend that legislation.
It applies more for other departments, Chair, but obviously every department will send this notification.
And I'll just indulge myself as chair and say our former committee colleague Pat Catley, proud bit of work done by him to introduce that bill. Okay, 10.4 and 5 are Hansard transcripts of main estimates 25-26 and budget number 2 bill, the oral evidence and the oral evidence session which we had with the FCA. They are respectively at page 541 and 547. So members, just to note but agree, I presume that the transcript from the FCA session will be added to the banking inquiry web page and report. Okay. The next item is 10.6, which is the AERC Assembly and Executive Review Committee. I should declare an interest. I am on that committee. Call for evidence on cross-cutting executive strategies, which is a bit of work the AERC is doing. That's at page 36. The AERC has commenced a call for evidence on its review on cross-cutting executive strategies. It wishes to explore the current arrangements for committee scrutiny of cross-cutting strategies arising from existing procedures and practices. The committee has been invited to provide a response by the 30th of September. Survey questions are outlined in the correspondence. So members, this is just to get people's initial views. I assume we will do a response, and I think we as a committee have probably more, probably the most cross-cutting role there is, probably even more than the Executive Office Committee, to be perfectly honest, because of the nature of budget setting. First of all, are members content that we provide a response? And are there any particular initial observations that members would like to make? Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with you. They're totally the budgets things we've talked about it at length about how we operate. I think it's a really good opportunity to raise how it is so cross-cutting and important to highlight. But I think it's a good opportunity to just flag the cross-cutting nature and some of the bizarre structures of the Department of Finance. So obviously we have cross-cutting as well. The human resource management, this is managed out for the whole civil service through the Department of Finance. And then we have the things like the civil law aspect and building regulations, the things that are continuing to sit in our department. And like, for example, the Legal Oversight Commissioner, we had the pieces of legislation coming through here, but ultimately when it gets up and running, it's going to hit the Department of Justice's budget. So I think that would be a really good opportunity to flag all of those things.
Yeah, I agree. Anybody else wish to come in or any other thoughts on it? Can I suggest that we have members, first of all, if you have any additional views on this, I would encourage people to input into it, because I think this is actually important work, and I think the nature of our committee is probably we are uniquely placed to talk about the cross-cuttings, not maybe uniquely, but we are the linkage between budget setting and cross-cutting strategies is completely inextricably linked. So I think we need to reflect that in our response. And what I might suggest is if they want to come back, I'm not sure when the deadline is for response. Oh, it's right there. I've just read it out. 30th
The
of
other
September.
thing that I might just flag is we are anticipating the Financial Provisions Bill, which in itself is a fairly unique piece of cross-cutting work. And this will actually provide an opportunity, because we will be having to ask members how they want to deal with that in terms of seeking evidence from other committees.
So could I suggest, depending on the clerk team's other pressures, of which we have created many, whenever they are able to come back to us with maybe draft answers or draft bullets, answers to the questions, can I ask members to genuinely engage on that and provide thoughts and observations? I don't think there's any particular, I know it wouldn't demand a draft response by any particular time. We've got 3 months or something, so 3.5. Okay, members content with that? Okay, the next agenda item is draft forward work programme. I'm going to ask the clerk to talk through a few things for me.
So members are aware we are at Studio Ulster next week. The timings for that, we'll issue these and I'll put them out in a WhatsApp as well, is 12:15 for a tour. We'll send all the relevant information, maps and all sorts of things like that. 1 p.m. for lunch, and we can do that then with officials there and also the officials that are coming to brief, because they'll accompany us in the tour. And then 2 p.m. for normal committee meeting. We've also confirmed that the City and Growth Deals officials will be able to brief. They'll accompany on the turn. That's the rationale for the the tour, as members are aware, that this year we're starting to see significant amounts of money being drawn down for city and region growth deals, and this is an example of that. And it allows the committee to see that, Chair.
Yes, Steve.
Yeah, just a very quick one. I noticed Rachel Reeves today just announced what was an extra 16 billion in infrastructure for England, so there will be additional Barnetts.
Yes, I think that's. I was going to raise that in a minute.
Oh, sorry,
yes.
sorry, Matthew.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But I think yes, we should get that and answer the question.
I think because it's been spun as part of city deals for Manchester and the rest of it, the officials should be able to talk to us by that, because I know the minister was briefed on that on Monday.
I don't know, because I've just seen the headline. I don't know if it's in year or whether it'll be part of the
I don't know
CSR.
yet. I seriously don't know. I've just seen it as myself.
There'll be a fair amount of unpacking as to whether, just how that would work with the Barnett consequence. We've seen before where it looks like things may, and then in the end they don't. But we can check that with the department.
Yeah.
Chair, also members have already raised the 3 SRs in relation to the Legal Oversight Commissioner are scheduled and have been to the Examiner or going to the Examiner. So we're now in a point where those will be scheduled then once that process has been completed for debate. Members will recall they're all affirmative, so they have to be debated. So we'll look at when that's scheduling, we flag that up and so on, and obviously the Chair will participate in that. And also members have agreed today to look at scheduling in PermSec and relevant officials around the LCM, so we'll work and see how that can best be made to work for members' diaries. I suspect what I may ask is probably a Tuesday lunchtime. It can be a discrete session put into a Tuesday lunchtime. Sooner the better, really, Chair. If we
I think so, and I would encourage members to. I know people's diaries are under pressure, but this is a really important thing. Like, this is we do need to, I think, be seen to properly understand what's going wrong here, because it's an important one, because I think it may be the first time ever a piece of primary legislation requiring an LCM has gone through without. Well, no, it wasn't, because we were collapsed.
There's all sorts of
and all sorts of other reasons. Okay, so we're content with. Yes, of course.
Sorry, yes, that was Chair. I forgot to do that. Sorry, and we're looking for an indication of members being able to attend Studio Ulster, just because we need to get catering sorted for that. So we're hopeful.
Are you sure? Yeah.
Okay, that looks like
a good
turnout.
Get your picture.
Ms. Dolan won't be able to. Now, bearing in mind, because it's a remote location, there won't be a Zoom facility. So this is the one in Dargan. So it's part of a group. Studio Ulster also takes in the big Titanic studio across the way. So this is basically across on the other side of Belfast Lough. But we'll give direction for that. So it's technically North Belfast.
Just where you go down to the ferry terminal, just turn in there on the left.
But equally exciting.
Gemma, just in case.
Order, yeah. So, remember to indicate then. I think we are covered then in terms of our forward look program. Members are content that it gets published. Yes. Okay. In that case, I will move on to Agenda 12, which is is any other business? Does anybody have any other business they wish to raise? As I discussed, as I just mentioned, Dr. Aiken, there is a Barnett consequential potentially that we might get, but I would just like us to clarify via the DAL whether that is a Barnett consequential or whether it just washes into a CSR process that isn't. I don't know, because I've just seen a headline. Other than that, no other business. Okay, in that case, members, the next we'll move on to the date, time and place of next meeting. The next meeting is scheduled Wednesday, 12th of June 2025. Wednesday 12th, I say the 11th. At 2 p.m. in Studio Ulster. Tour of the studio has been organised for 12:15, and then there's lunch, but then we'll obviously have a committee session after that. If members are content, I will put the question that committee is now adjourned. Meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, Chair.